Well, I have a terrific panel. Nick Gillespie is editor-in-chief of Reason TV and Reason.com. He's also a columnist with the Daily Beast, a very popular website these days. He's co-author of a book called The Declaration of Independence: How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America. Nick Gillespie.
Thank you. This is, I bring her around wherever I go. It's really helpful. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and the main thing I think that I want to say, and I have no idea how Trump is playing in Australia. I have some idea of how he's playing in the United States, and the important thing of his first 100 days, and for some of you may not realize the whole idea of a president's first 100 days goes back to Franklin Roosevelt, who had he was elected in 1932, took office in 1933 during the Depression, and he had promised bold, persistent experimentation, which unfortunately he followed up on constantly throughout his presidency. But he talked a lot about doing a bunch of things in the first 100 days. And I think there's also a Napoleon come back to power that lasted about 100 days. But that's where the fixation in the American media comes from. It is an arbitrary figure. Trump has not much to show for his first 100 days, and as Tom was saying, and as I think most people understand, it's really what comes after this. But the big thing is that Trump is not a change agent in the way that he has portrayed himself, the way that his people, his supporters have talked about themselves. He's neither, and that's not all bad, he has not been the cataclysm that many people feared and maybe secretly hoped for, but he also really hasn't done much yet. And more importantly, he does not seem to have a stable core program other than attitude, which is not nothing, but he has already walked back a number of his proposals. He has backtracked on various types of things. The one thing that he has done in 100 days that got universal acclaim in the United States was bombing Syria. And the rationale for him doing that, it was kind of fascinating because one of the ways that he was elected, or one of his talking points, is that he was not an internationalist, he was not a globalist. He attacked Hillary Clinton and other Republicans for putting the world's interest before America's. And he specifically and explicitly attacked a Syrian airbase or launched some bombs on it as a humanitarian intervention, which only a week before he did that, he had denounced the idea of that kind of very action. And that's kind of a shorthand of how he's a fundamentally, I think, incoherent person. And that's probably going to play out in a way that is not necessarily good for the United States or for the world. But he's done in his first 100 days so far, things that I would consider very bad, including he's tried to pass 2 forms of a refugee ban. So even as the United States is creating more refugees around the world due to our feckless and ineffective and generally immoral foreign policy, even as we're creating more refugees, we're refusing to allow them to come into our country if Trump got his way, as well as banning a number of citizens from a variety. It depends on which version. From majority Muslim countries. He came out with what he called famously a skinny budget, where he was going to cut things, and he did pass, or at least put forth an idea. It's not an actual budget, but of cutting things like the State Department, cutting things like the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. Not bad ideas, but he also, all of the savings he plowed back into the military with the net effect of looking at a budget that covers about 1/3 of government spending. It's about the same as it was the year before. It's just kind of shifted around. He, along with the Republican Congress, failed manifestly in their repeal and replace Obamacare bill. This was probably as much as building a wall and keeping Mexicans out. The idea of getting rid of Obamacare was the holy grail of Donald Trump's presidential aspirations and his campaign. And the fact that neither he nor the Republican Congress, which is really more the issue, I think, in America, the fact that they did not have a plan in place that even their own party would support it, did not even go to a vote in Congress. Again, it's a sign that he has a lot to learn about governing and about politics, but also that the Republican Party is not really all that when it comes to being interested in cutting back government, cutting back the size, scope, and spending of government. He has made a series of some good, and I'll talk about those in a minute, cabinet appointments or naming certain types of commissioners of various governmental subgroups, but he's also put into place people like Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, who is a staunch federalist, meaning that he believes that things should be things should be sent back to the states for control, except for those things which Jeff Sessions doesn't like, such as legal marijuana, civil asset forfeiture reform, and as a result, we have a Justice Department now that is talking about ramping up the war on drugs, asset forfeiture, even obscenity prosecutions at the federal level. Having said all of this, there are some good things that Trump has done and that augur well, and specifically, Steve Bannon, who is his kind of Richelieu, or one of them, has talked about dismantling the administrative state, which is an interesting concept and something that should be done. In the United States over the past, at least in the 21st century, in many ways, there is no will to govern. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have really been able to maintain a sustained effort to pass legislation, which is the way things are supposed to be done. And they've ceded an immense amount of power to the executive branch where bureaucrats or commissioners get to dictate what is policy. A lot of the things, if you read about campus insanity, where students are being charged with creating hostile workplaces based on sexual comments or sexual behavior. All of that is coming through reinterpretations of existing language for the Department of Education and a subunit of that called the Office of Civil Rights. Reinterpretations of things like what the Environmental Protection Agency can do or how they can dictate clean water, clean air statutes, as well as the Federal Communications Commission, which governs telecommunications and has also defined itself to actually include the ability to govern how people get on the internet and how internet service providers charge for their services. This is a problem, and in this case, Trump has made some really nice appointments. There's people like Scott Gottlieb, who will be running the Food and Drug Administration, Ajit Pai at the FCC, and others who are true deregulators. They don't believe that the government, they essentially believe in something close to permissionless innovation, as Mike Munger was talking about, and that's all good. But in the end, and I'll go back to, for those of you who were around on Friday night when I talked, what Trump represents, and I think what we see in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, is a politics ultimately of exhaustion. This is where the long 20th century goes to die. There is nothing new or radical about Donald Trump. This is a man who famously does not use email. He has his emails printed out and then he writes in a gold pen on them, and then people type his notes back in and send it out. He is not a visionary. He is not a forward-looking person. His entire conception of America, and for those of us of a certain age who grew up in the New York area as Donald Trump did, when he speaks, he is speaking about a country circa about 1977, and particularly in New York, which was in dire straits. He lives in a world where crime is constantly going up. He lives in a world where America is on its heels. We're not winning enough, as if the 1972 Olympics had just happened and the U.S. basketball team had lost for the first time to the Soviet Union. It is a weirdly nostalgic, backward-looking, anger-filled, out-of-touch vision of America and of the future. And I think that is mirrored in the Republican Party, where they're still talking about cutting taxes. They can't get around to cutting spending. When the Republicans ran Congress and the White House in the early part of the 20th century, under George Bush, they increased federal spending by 50% in real terms over 8 years. The Democrats had such a deep bench of deep thinkers, of people looking at the future, that the two candidates that they ran for president had a combined age of about 150 between them, and each of them took Uber to all of their campaign events, but they hate Uber and they hate the sharing economy. This is where we are in America, and I think what we see with Donald Trump, and we can talk about this more, it's a holding pattern. There is nothing new or revolutionary there. And I agree with Ezra that part of his appeal, and Trump said this when he announced for president in June, I guess, of 2015, he said he was running against political correctness. And that's appealing. It's appealing to a lot of libertarians because finally people can start saying what's on their mind. But by the same token, if you are against international trade, and if you use the code word fair trade rather than free trade, you're living in a late 20th century consensus that free trade is a good thing, and free trade is something that free people should believe in. If you're against immigration, if you're against the sharing economy, or if you have no idea what the internet really is, you're not going to be a leader of much in the 21st century. And so I'll leave it there, and I'll look forward to talking to you in the questions.